The Exterminator was a very heat-efficient killer, an old treasured design incorporating improved technology that Comstar, in its former capacity as the caretakers of knowledge, had jealously guarded for centuries. Except for the most hard-fought battles like the one on York, Shakov usually fought with the chill touch of his coolant suit aching in his muscles. This shooting gallery battle for Halfway had him shivering with cold. The Exterminator is a bit of an odd duck battle mech. In the lore, it's a fearsome high-tech hunter-killer that was so terrifying that the First Succession War great houses formed special units to deliberately hunt down the last remaining machines. On the tabletop, it was a good example of a mech that has some advantages with some good technology that allowed for a solid set of weaponry. It's an interesting bit of disconnect, but we're going to go with what we have and just trust the sources. Designed for the Star League Defense Force and first constructed in 2630, the Exterminator was advertised as a specialized hunter-killer of mechs, rear-line units, and as a headhunter for battlefield commanders. It sported a unique electronics package and what were described as ECM and null signature devices to reduce its presence on enemy scanners. Additionally, it was the first mech to feature a chameleon light polarized shield, which was an additional layer of electronic countermeasures. The EXT-4D Exterminator benefited from additional advanced technologies like its Magna 390 XL engine and 10 double heat sinks. These perks allowed for the addition of jump jets that could carry the mech up to 180 meters on a leap, and still there was enough mass left over for an impressive number of weapons. 10.5 tons of armor provided 168 points of protection, which is less than what most would expect to see on a 65-ton battle mech. For context, the Thunderbolt, which is a much more rough and tumble design, has 13 tons of armor, and the humble and notoriously under-armored Rifleman 2N has just 7.5. So we've got a 65-tonner with an XL engine, a 696 movement profile, and a less than stellar amount of armor. What's the big upside for the Exterminator 4D? The weapons loadout is fairly solid and features an anti-missile system in the right torso, which is pretty rare for battle mechs of the time. Instead of a primary big gun weapon system, the Exterminator 4D rolls with 4 standard medium lasers, split evenly between the left and right arms. Backing up the lasers and offering a long-range reach, an LRM-10 sits in the left torso along with a ton of ammunition stored in the center torso. Finally, a small laser in the head finishes off the build and provides a little short-range warmth. Now, it's said that the Exterminator 4D was used almost exclusively as a hunter-seeker battle mech thanks to its advanced sensor and electronics package. Unfortunately, there's no official tabletop conversion of these advantages until much later, so what we're left with is a fast and spicy 65-tonner with an XL engine and a fairly decent mid and short-range punch. There's a disconnect between the highly kitted-out version and the standard Exterminator 4D, which filled most of the examples of the mech on the field. Only a small number of the 4Ds were ever given all of that fancy technology. The Exterminator really ends up being kind of like the queen in chess. It can be quite useful in the fight as a finisher, but if you bring it out too early, it's going to get picked off. That one was for the fellow chess team nerds out there. You know who you are. Documentation for the original SLDF EXT-4Ds reads that the stealth systems aboard the mech included heat baffles that guided waste heat out near the feet rather than higher up on the battle mech. This reduced the IR signature from it in normal operating conditions. Much of the other technology outlined sounds a lot like an early attempt at stealth armor. Again, not something you're going to see in most tabletop 4D use. Deployment of the Exterminator 4D was limited, and the few that existed were often themselves the targets of hunting operations by Special Force House units during the First Succession War. Because telling the difference between the super special 4Ds and the general purpose ones was difficult, they were all just targeted. By the time the smoke cleared in that first devastating conflict between the great houses, it was deemed likely that all of the exterminators had been eradicated. Eliminated? Made extinct? Surely there must be a name for something that has been forcibly hunted down and destroyed. Oh well, it'll probably come to me later. Rafe turned and raced after the convoy, which had opened a half-block lead. In his 360-degree view strip, he saw Van Phalen's Exterminator slam into the Marauder at full speed, sending armor fragments in every direction. Despite the impact, the militia mech stayed on its feet and tried to fight back. Van Phalen didn't stop, instead wading in and using his mech's fist like sledgehammers. Both smashed into the red mech's side, shattering armor and denting the interior frame. Before the last of the Exterminators were thought to have gone the way of the Dodo, there was a downgraded version from Callan Industries called the EXT-4A, which did see some use after 3007. It had a standard Vox 325 fusion engine, 1 fewer jump jet, and just 11 single heat sinks instead of the 10 double. The armor remained at the same 10.5 tons, and the weapons loadout was also the same except for the anti-missile system was swapped out, or likely couldn't be found for installation, and in its place a machine gun and a half-ton of ammunition was added. Obviously, the spec decrease with the 4A is substantial and reflects just how much technology was lost in the brutal and destructive conflict following the collapse of the Star League. The stealth and IR masking technologies of the original Exterminator were totally lost and would only be rediscovered many years later. Now, it's worth noting there were some Exterminators among Kerensky's SLDF forces that left the Inner Sphere, and records show that the Mech was among the forces of both the clans and Pentagon powers during Operation Klondike. There are a couple of variants that the clans played with, but the stealth and IR technology was largely abandoned. Thankfully, the future of the Exterminator in the Inner Sphere was not extinguished completely, thanks to the clandestine efforts of Comstar to shepherd what technology they could from the Star League. Once revealed to the Inner Sphere, ComGuard units would field a few examples of the Exterminator 4D. In 3060, Comstar unveiled the results of an update on the BattleMech labeled the EXT-5E. Instead of trying to replicate the original high technology, the 5E saw some pretty substantial upgrades to other systems. The final result was a speedy 65-tonner that could work in a team to bring down much larger enemies. Featuring endosteel, 10 double heat sinks, and an XL engine, the Exterminator 5E is a return to form for the BattleMech. Though it lacked jump jets, it did carry a masked system which could boost the movement profile from a 690 to a 612 for as long as you're willing to take a risk taking a header like a drunk NASCAR fan being tased by the local PD. The armor was increased to 13 tons of standard plate, which improved the mech's survivability. The 5E's offensive weaponry is limited to 4 ER medium lasers split evenly between the left and right arms. This is rather modest in comparison to the original 4D due to the installation of an improved narc pod system with 12 reloads and an improved C3 computer. It's an interesting take on the mech and one that aligns better with its original lore. An Exterminator would run through the enemy lines, narc pod a target, and escape as the LRMs rain down. How you feel about the EXT-5E is likely going to boil down to that improved C3 computer and the narc pods. If you don't have a use for either of them, then you're probably going to want to look elsewhere. The Exterminator 5F was another bite at the apple in 3074, which pulled the ER medium lasers and the improved narc from the 5E and replaced them with a pair of light PPCs in the arms, an ER small laser in the head, and a multi-missile launcher 7 in the left torso. The 2 tons of ammunition for the MML provided the minimum amount necessary to make the venture worth it. The 5F is pretty lackluster for the cost, as a full Alpha Strike can only do 17 damage with the LRMs and 27 damage at 3 hexes before the minimum range of the light PPCs come into play, and it cuts it back down to 17. Unfortunately, I think the 5F really struggles to find a reason for its own existence, and if you're looking for an Exterminator that can live up to its name, we're going to need to keep looking. As though a perfectly landed strike on a footballer, the 65-ton BattleMech thundered into the 20-ton enemy mech. His Exterminator rang like a struck bell, the kinetic force pummeling him. He suffered only a spray of damage across his own armor, but the light mech must have been far more damaged than he surmised, as it literally disintegrated around him, the torso practically vaporizing, both legs cartwheeling down the road behind him in different directions. As it turned out, Comstar had been working on an Exterminator in the hope of returning it to its roots as a stealthy hunter-killer. The EXT-6CS program involved a refit of the 5F with several advanced technologies. The first, a null signature system, used multiple overlapping passive and active electronics countermeasure systems as well as the previously mentioned heat baffles to limit a mech's infrared and electromagnetic signatures as much as the laws of physics allowed. On the tabletop, a mech that has the system enabled benefits from a +1 to hit modifier at medium range and a +2 at long range. The BattleMech also cannot be located by a Beagle active probe or a Clan active probe. Additionally, any heat-seeking weapons, such as missiles, must calculate their to-hit modifiers as if the null signature target was 18 points cooler than whatever it is in reality. Usually, that's going to be 0. There are some limitations, such as it taking up 8 critical locations, still being able to be spotted by Bloodhound probes, and the system not impacting fire from infantry, but overall, it's pretty impressive. The 6CS was also given a chameleon light polarization shield, much like the original, which works in conjunction with the null signature system. When engaged, the system warps and bends the visual light spectrum to make the BattleMech harder to identify at long and extreme ranges. The effect is sometimes described as a blurring of the edges. Similar to the null system, the chameleon LPS using Mech benefits from an additional +1 to rolls against it at the medium range and +2 at the long and extreme range. So that'd be a +4 with both systems engaged. Of course, all the fancy tech doesn't mean much if you can't hit your target with something when you get close. The 6CS Exterminator carried 2 light PPCs split between the arms, 2 medium pulse lasers, one in the head and the other in the center torso, and a multi-missile launcher 7 in the left torso. 3 tons of missile ammo was stored in the right torso, along with a case too. Overall, the Exterminator 6CS is an interesting prototype design, and it likely is as close to the post-Star League universe as going to get to the original Operation Sneaky Sneak version of the Special Forces LDF 4D design. I'm personally not super happy with the light PPCs as they lack the punch, and the minimum range on them really doesn't fit with the idea that this BattleMech is going to chase down its high-profile target and kill it quickly. Alas, I will have something to say about that with the Mechfrog variant in a bit. But first, there is one more official variant that we need to discuss. It's our IlClan era upgrade to the design, which typically has some new bells and whistles to bring it up to the 3150s playing field. Whoever is producing the EXT7X variant is doing so with very little fanfare. In fact, as of writing this, the cobbled together specs of the mech come not from a factory or a business rep office, but from extrapolated capabilities spotted in battle ROM footage. Some have speculated that the 7X was another example of the Republic of the Sphere turning to the development of superweapons that could somehow prevent the crumbling of their power base through targeted strikes against high-profile enemies. Others have suggested it was a Federated Suns project, as several Capellan battlefield commanders have been targets of the 7X's wrath. Of course, this doesn't mean it couldn't also be the product of a combined secret weapons program or even the Capellans purging their own in a clandestine manner. No matter where the 7X originated, it's clearly being taken seriously as leaders of the major powers take additional measures to protect rear line HQs and VIPs who fashion themselves as the sort who want to lead from the front. The battle ROM footage shows the Exterminator 7X likely has a downgraded engine with a standard movement profile of 585 with jump jets. That engine is very likely an XXL version to cram in all the other items on the mech at the price of 6 engine critical hit locations on each side torso. A supercharger explains the brief boosts of speed, which pushes that movement profile up to 5-10-5 when it's most needed. There's also a composite internal structure, which is neat, but that XXL engine, that sure is a thing. Stealth armor and an ECM suite provide some life to the mech that very much does not want to be taking fire with all those engine critical hit locations. A laser anti-missile system was also spotted, picking out incoming missiles from the air. As far as offensive weaponry goes, 4 variable speed medium pulse lasers are the primary damage dealers, though they are backed up by a medium range missile launcher 10 in the left torso and an ER small laser located in the mech's head. Finally, a coolant pod in the left arm gives the mech an additional opportunity to alpha strike its target, ideally at close range where those VSP lasers do 9 damage apiece. With a hefty alpha strike and the ability to do it a few turns in a row, a speedy Exterminator 7X could be quite deadly and finally fulfill the goal of achieving that headhunter role outlined in the lore for the original 4D BattleMech. I like it, but boy is it going to be a wild card in a fight. It'll either really make an impact or end up being a complete waste of time. Very little chance of anything in between, and it'll come down to how fickle the dice gods are that day. Of course, I am arrogant enough to take my own swing at creating the ultimate Exterminator variant with my MF version. It has some nice technological treats without going so far off the deep end that it wouldn't be fun to play. So let's check it out. As with some of the other variants, I did end up dropping the size of the engine down to a more reasonable 585 movement profile, though I did go with a light fusion engine to save on some additional mass. Endosteel trades some space for mass, and it allowed the addition of jump jets, which had been abandoned in the more recent variants. We stuck with standard armor, but added an additional 1.5 tons to bring the total to 12. We needed some sneaky tech, and the combination of an ECM suite in the left torso and a chameleon light polarization shield should make hitting our mech a little bit more difficult. Our primary weapon is a snub-nosed PPC in the left arm, able to hit at 10 damage at 9 or fewer hexes, but able to hit out to 15 if necessary for 5 damage. With the MF variant, you're going to want to get in close to take advantage of the 3 medium pulse lasers placed into the right arm. The combination of snub-nosed PPC and the lasers should be able to do significant damage to medium and light mechs, and even humble and unexpected heavy or assault if you can get around behind it or even hit it from the side. Finally, to add something the other variants were lacking, a heavy flamer placed into the mech's head allows for far more entertaining cleansing of command tents, mobile HQs, bunkers, and trenches full of flammable infantry. If you give the MF variant a try, please let me know how it goes. If you want the record sheet, I've added it to the video comments. So what's the verdict on our Exterminator? This one's tough. If we go by lore, it's a mech so terrifying that the Great Houses devoted considerable effort to wipe it out. If we look at the tabletop, it's a cool looking mech that has a great CGL resculpt, but also falls a little flat in the face of expectations. It's a unique take on the 65-ton battle mech, and that is facing some really tough competition with likes of the Thunderbolt, Crusader, Tempest, Axeman, lots of great 65-ton battle mechs out there. I'm quite pleased that the newer variants brought the Exterminator up to a place where it can start living up to its name and lore. Thanks so much for coming by as we talked some BattleTech today. If you feel the video is worthy, remember to hit that like and subscribe button. Every little bit helps YouTube know the video is worth sharing with others. For those of you who go the extra step to becoming a channel member and Ko-Fi supporter, I owe you a great debt of gratitude. You're amazing and making all of this nonsense possible. Now take care. Until we meet again, go out and make the world a slightly better place today and tomorrow.